To be honest with you, this is the reason why I got into color grading. I remember watching Saving Private Ryan and I was blown away. Black Hawk Down is another one. Like growing up watching these movies had such a crazy effect on me, and I just didn't really know what was causing that until now, like where I see that the color drove the story and the entire point home so hard. Everything is going to be done using Resolve's OFX and everything that's available inside Resolve. So if you own a copy of Resolve, you will be able to create this look at the end of this tutorial. Obviously, I would recommend going back, watching it a couple of times and like really taking it in, what's really happening here. Without any further ado, let's jump right in. All right, so we're going for the gritty Cold War look. So first thing that we're gonna do is, as always, let's go on shotdeck.com, and the movie that I picked out is All Quiet on the Western Front. And there's a lot going on here, right? So I sorted it by most popular, and you can clearly see there's tons of blue in some shots, there's green in some shots. I personally think this is a pretty good example of like the look that we're kind of creating. Keep that in mind. I don't want to bring it in and just kind of do a one-to-one match. I just want to go off of the vibe and then see what our footage needs, because again, there's a bunch of different palettes here. They didn't just go with one specific palette. So now let's jump back into our shot, and that's what we got. So this is filmed on Sony a7S III, and this is your log. This is with the CST applied to Rec 709. And then here, all I'm doing is I am converting my image to use my tried and tested film print emulation from Resolve, and we're using a cooler flavor of it. So D65 is cooler, and if we go D55 is going to be warmer. And since we're going for that steely cooler look, we're gonna choose this flavor, okay? And this is available to anybody who has DaVinci Resolve. So you can just go under film looks and apply that. So that's all that's happening here, but we're gonna build the entire look on top of that. So what do we have to do? Once again, we have to create that steely highlights, like desaturated highlights. The overall image needs to be muted as well. And then we're gonna pump some cooler tones in our lower mids or mid-tones. We're gonna add some pop to our image. Like right now, it's very cinematic and it's beautiful, but I want to just bring more attention to everything and just make it gritty. And then we're gonna add more texture to our image, right? So the first one, we're just gonna call this exposure, and we're gonna leave that there, and let's create another node. And then this one we're gonna call contrast or curves, right? Let's just not spoil the surprise and work off of these two first. So first thing that I want to do is I want to start off with my custom curve. So I'm gonna click right here, pop this open so we can see what we're doing. I'm gonna bring this down so we can still see all of this while we're working on our curve, okay? What I want to do is I want to kind of park on my middle gray, which is going to be somewhere around here. So I'm just gonna hold shift and click right here so it doesn't move anything. And then that way we're just locking it up so we don't really fudge with our exposure, okay? And then we're gonna make changes around that. So I'm gonna just grab a point right here and just like go really aggressive. I'm gonna create another point right here and same thing, like go pretty aggressive, okay? So I'm just looking at what's happening on my screen and I'm going pretty crazy. So if I do before and after, you can start to see like how, like look at this white right here, how we're just adding so much to it. And we're gonna start doing the same thing on the bottom end, okay? So I'm just gonna create a point right here and I'm gonna pull it in quite a bit. I'm gonna create another point and I'm gonna push it in somewhere around here. Do we need to bring another point in here? Not necessarily, so I'm gonna just leave that there and then maybe pull this one in a little bit more and then this one in again, just a little bit more. And that's looking like a pretty good contrast. And can we push it more here? So I'm just gonna keep bringing this up like that. And this is looking pretty good, right? Like once again, if you look at right here, the white, where we started to where we ended up. But this is not necessarily doing what we want because it's adding more saturation and it's kind of not the characteristic that we're after. So one way to control that is when you increase the contrast, it also increases the saturation. And we don't want that here. We just want to affect the luma values of this contrast and let the RGB levels stay where they were. So one way to do that is just clicking on this right here and going to 50. Okay, so I'm just gonna click right here and go to 50 on all of them. I'm gonna break this chain, and then I'm gonna want the contrast to still be 100. So look at what I just did. Okay, if I were to save a version, let's create a new version, and let's go back to our version 1 and then just undo what we had. And now if I give you before and after, so this is with like no color applied in the RGB levels, and then this is with. So look at how unpleasant and saturated this is compared to what's happening here. Another way to look at it is this. If I were to go here and just go in my red channel and just hold my control key and click right here to all of these to basically reset my, look at this, reset my red channel, and I can do the same thing. And by the way, you can end up creating really cool looks. Just look at like what we just did, right? So if it's like 1940s or something like that and you're going for a very extreme look, you can also do it by breaking the chain and messing with your RGB curves. But here I'm trying to prove a point that there are two ways to go about that steely look that we just achieved. Okay, so even if I do this and then go back to my blue channel, do the same exact thing, you'll see what's happening. Okay, so if I reset this, the results should be exactly the same if I go back to remember where we just killed the opacity of these. So think of this as opacity. All right, so if I go 0, it's basically negative. So that's the confusing part about like these values, these parameters right here. 50 is basically 0. Negative, like 0 is basically negative 100 if you want to think about it like that, and 100 is basically full color. So again, don't get confused. 50 is just 0 effect. So that's how you want to look at it. Okay, so I'm basically taking all of that out, and again, if I show you this example where we killed all of these and just let the Y channel do the talking, we got the same exact results. So there's two ways to go about it. I like to do this, because then that way I have so much more control, because I can go back in and try to like play around with these. Like, do I want to pull this? Do I want to add more red juice in there? What about green, right? Like, do I want to add more green or add more magenta into my image? Like, this is a pretty cool look. So you can play around with this a lot, and that's why I kind of like to do it this way instead of doing it this way. Okay, so let's go back to this shot, and we already achieved a pretty gnarly, like, look at this aggressive curve. Like, can we do more push and pull with it, right? So like, let's try it out. So if I were to push it to something like this and then take it and just like really keep going aggressive with it, like, is it too much? Like, I'm just looking at his cheek, like his face right now, and I'm just focusing on that. Like, am I going too far? You know, I don't think so. I think like this kind of like super aggressive look that we're going for, we're accomplishing it without blowing up anything. All right, our highlights are protected, our shadows are protected, so we're good right now. Then in my overall exposure, what I can do is I can go under my global offset, and then my offset is basically like stops on your camera. And here, like, do I want to bring it up a little bit, right? So like even like a quarter of a stop. Do I want to just bring up the image a little bit? I don't think it hurts. We can just set it here, and then later we can mess with it and see if we want to make any changes. So what if like now, if we just kind of go back to what we had, is that a pretty good contrast? I think it kind of works. So like, I'm liking that, and I'm liking like bringing up the image to just see a little bit more detail. So I'm gonna leave these two changes right there, and then I'm gonna create a new node, and this is where the look is gonna be created. So all I'm looking for is, you know, I just wanna add more cyan into my shadows and lower mids, and just cool off the image a little bit. So what I really want to do is I want to kind of keep the image somewhere around here, punch in, and then I'm just going to go under my primaries. I'm going to take my lift and I'm going to start pulling it down. Okay, you guys know I always like to go too far and then kind of come up. And now what I want to do is I want to take my gamma and I want to just like pump a little bit magenta in there, just a little bit, not too much. Okay, so even just something like this, and you can see how much we cooled off our image, right? So this is doing a lot of the things that we want to achieve, like in that world that we want to go to. So do we want to push it a little bit more? Like what happens if we just kind of take the lift and keep pushing it to that, like this kind of cyan world, right? And I don't even want to clean this up. Like I like this sort of a little bit of like the teal just kind of seeped into the shadows. I kind of like that. I kind of want to leave that in there. I feel like this just makes it look so cinematic. So I'm like, really, if I pull back and we look at it, it looks kind of cool. So now one of the things that I want to do is I want to create a layer mixer. So I'm going to right click here, add node, and we're going to do layer. And then here, what I want to do is I want to click right here in our layer mixer, go under 3D layer, and I just want to select part of his face like that, like something like this. And then I just want to go ahead and add a little bit of denoise, so something like this. And then I'm gonna go under my gamma, and I just want to kind of like really add magenta and kind of play with like this teal magenta color scheme type thing, right? So like if I were to just kind of do before and after, and even like what's happening right here in the dirt, again, if we go back and look at some of these images, you can clearly see that similar thing is happening. So look at that, right? Like how much magenta is in there with that green that they got going on. So it's pretty extreme, right? But it kind of works if it's done right. And you can see it here too, right? Like look at the skin tones. I mean, just right here, look at the color palette. So we're not even going that extreme, right? So we can just kind of leave it there, and it just creates like a very strong sort of look. One of the things that we can do is we can actually try to go here under our overall look and try to pull it back so it doesn't have like such a strong effect. So even if we park it somewhere around here, I'm at 42, it's looking pretty good, right? So where are we at so far? From here to here, massive difference, right? Massive difference. We're working in a way where nothing is being cracked or broken or anything like that. And then what about our look? So this is before, this is after. Like look at how big of a difference we made just in our look node, okay? So then let's go here, create a new node. And what I want to do is, because of all the contrast, I think one of the things that we lost is like, we just want to bring a little bit more information in his eyes. Even with or without the contrast, like we just don't have a lot of information in his eyes. So I'm just going to create a very fun window. So we're going to go under our windows. I'm going to click right here, and we're just going to basically create like the little raccoon eyes, okay? So I'm just gonna do something like this, and then I'm just gonna go under my gamma and I'm gonna raise it up, and then in my windows I'm just going to soften it out. Let's just do overall softness and let's see what happens. So maybe something like that. And let's go under tracking and track this, right? So we're just gonna go under here, we're gonna click on this, and we're gonna track it forward and track it backwards with this one button. That's a new feature. I think it's a Resolve 18 or 18.5 feature. So if I hit Command W, we can get rid of the window and we can see the difference that it's making. So this is before, this is after. Big difference, right? But if we go back and if we play it, like it looks pretty natural. So this is before, right? And then this is after. You should be able to see the difference. And then this is after. Let's play it through. So we get to see his eyes quite a bit, right? Now the intensity, you can play with it, right? You can pull it down a little bit. The only reason why you'll probably think like, oh, it looks pretty noticeable maybe, is because you saw what it looked like before. But people that are watching the movie, and if this is a quick shot, like, you know, they'll appreciate like looking into his eyes, right? So we can leave that there. And then the next thing that I'm going to do, so let's just call it eyes. And then let's create a new node. And then this one I'm going to call texture. Okay. So this one, we're going to use a very cool Resolve effects called Texture Pop. And we're gonna drop that on. And when you first drop it on, nothing really happens, right? What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead, change the color mode from RGB to Luma and Chroma. So then that way we don't mess with Chroma at all. I don't wanna add any punch into the RGB values of the image. I just want to affect the Luma values, okay? So what I wanna do is I wanna leave the strength as is, and I wanna just go under my detail and I wanna start cranking it up. So I don't know, maybe something like that. And you might think like, dude, this just looks kind of unreal and weird. First of all, it kind of does look cool. Like, I mean, just look at that, right? So like that adds so much more grit. So this is before, this is after. And let's not forget, we started with this and then this is where we are, right? So this is pretty gnarly, but I think we can do better. So one of the things that I don't like when you just apply the effect is that we can click on tonal range and I don't want to affect my shadows. So what I can do is I can just grab this and pull it all the way back. And right now we're just, see, like we're not affecting our shadows at all anymore. So this is looking a lot softer, a lot better. Same thing with highlights. I don't want to affect my highlights, so I can just kill my highlights. So now all we're affecting are the midtones, and that's great, okay? Like, I like what's happening. Can we control it a little bit? Maybe. Like, so we can take it, right, and just pull it back a little bit on the effect. So if I do before and after, I just love the detail that it's pulling up in all these areas and controlling our shadows and highlights. So we're just affecting the midtones. I think this effect is doing a lot, okay, for that gritty look that we're going for. Saving Private Ryan, whatever you want to think of. Now let's do halation. Again, let's just use Resolve's halation. You guys know I'm not a massive fan of it, but you know, there's ways to make it work for you. So we're gonna punch in around here. First thing that I want to do is I want to click on fine tune relative spread, and I want to go in there and basically take my green and pull it back a little bit. So I'm just working more with like red colors. All right, then I want to take my spread and I want to pull it back a little bit, not too much. Then I want to take my strength and I want to pull it back. Okay, so let's take the spread and pull it back. So if we just look at it, what's happening, I think it's still pretty strong. So I want to take the threshold and just kind of control it. At this point, I'm just looking at his face. Right? I don't want to affect his face too much with it, right? Like, I would rather the halation just work right here and not necessarily just like, see, affect the face so much. So let's keep going on the threshold. Let's turn this on so we can see what we're affecting. And then let's come out, turn this off, and let's see what we're doing. Okay, so let's take the spread, go easy, strength maybe a little bit more. So it's just a little bit more visible. I don't want it to be too subtle, right? So let's go to the knuckle. Let's go to the hand here. So let's say I want to leave it like that. That's fine, because I want the effect to be a little bit more pronounced. The other thing that I want to do is I just want to type in grain, and I don't want to use the grain that comes with this. I feel like it's just too, I don't know, caked on. So I'm going to click on grain, and we can just use Resolve's built-in grains. And if I were to punch in right here, you guys should still be able to tell how much it's doing. So I'm just going to go and use the 3500 or 35mm 400T, and it does a pretty good job, right? Fine grain does a pretty good job. Like, you can see it on the face. So this is after, this is before. And there's already some noise into the image, but I feel like it's just more monochromatic, so it doesn't bother me. I'm leaving that on. And honestly, like, the noise in the image is good enough where you can just even leave that as a grain, like right here. So you don't have to do an extra step, but I feel like, again, you know, staying true to the gritty look we're trying to create, I'm gonna actually leave this on. And now if we do a playback, you can just look at this image, okay? Like, where we started to where we ended up. And once again, if we go back to this, right? So this is our X709, this is our log. And then obviously that was the previous version, but like, this is what we ended up with. It's a pretty impressive feet, like how far we've gone with it. What happens if we turn this off? Remember like the exposures that we lift up like about quarter of a stop? Personally, I feel like I would leave it on, but if you want to turn it off and just make it even darker, you have that option. And that's why separating your nodes is so important. So you can just go back and turn certain things on and off and like see what it's really doing, right? So we can turn that off, we can turn the look off, and like what if we're just going for the warmer look, then we can just do that without like really troubleshooting if everything was done in like 1 or 2 nodes. All right, so let's check it out, right? Like, so if we were to break this up, we started with the 2383, and then I went and created my contrast, right? And kept the contrast clean. So like, look at, it's not adding any saturation. We just basically killed the RGB curves and just stuck with the Luma curve. And then we went in, used our HDR palette and lifted the image about quarter of a stop. Then went and added tons of like cooler tones into our midtones and our shadows. And then selected our skin out, right? Like countered that. And then went ahead and basically brought out the eyes. Made a pretty big difference. Added some texture and you can see how big of a difference it made. And then added halation and then grain. One more thing that we can do is, what if we go to, let's just say our texture node, and then here, if we just take our overall saturation and try to mess with it, right? So like I just take my saturation and I kind of pull it back. And then what if I just keep my saturation around 45-ish or even like 43, 44-ish, right? So like I just kind of kill my saturation a little bit too. So like if I do before and then this is after, again, it just constantly adds to that steely look. I don't mind the colors that we do have, because once again, if we go here and look at some of these shots, I mean, they have a lot of color. They have a lot of color. I mean, it might be actually way more saturated than what I got going on here. So just to kind of keep that in mind, but I'm just saying it's one of, you know, those things, like an option, like if you want to do it or not. I'll personally just like leave it as is. And there you have it, guys. So that's what we got. Now, if you really enjoyed what you saw here and want to get to the next level, then I have 2 different options for you. I have a 1-hour-long free training where you're going to learn things like how to get perfect skin tones, how to shot match better, and the gamma shift that happens when you upload something to YouTube, how to overcome that. You will also get access to tons of freebies, or you can just jump right in and get my masterclass that has over 300 on-demand videos. You get access to tons of discounts on third-party plugins that I use on my professional gigs, and weekly competition where you get tailor-made feedback, and it all comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So the links to all of that is in the description below. I highly recommend you check it out. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one.